This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is Jarema Osofsky, founder of the design studio Dirt Queen NYC and author of Moon Garden, a guide to creating an evening oasis. Moon gardening is an enchanting way to slow down in the evenings, immerse yourself in nature, and cultivate a relationship with your plants and the moon. And I'm talking with Jarema about how you can create your own.
A moon garden is a garden that comes alive at night with night blooming plants and night fragrant flowers. They're planted specifically with evening in mind, with white flowers and silver foliage that reflect the soft moonlight, and they're a serene space to relax in after a long day. I have a background in fine art, specifically painting. I was working for artists as an artist assistant, making art for museum and gallery shows. That was about 7 years ago. And I was also going through a rough breakup at the time. I was feeling pretty low and stuck and unfulfilled. And so I actually started growing my own plants. And I was propagating plants with my mom on her porch and sourcing vintage pots to plant them in. And I started selling them on the street outside my apartment building. And that's how I met my first customers. And one of the good things that came out of that breakup was I had a great deal on a 2-bedroom apartment. And I turned the second bedroom into a plant studio where people would come make an appointment with me and come over, and I would help them style their homes with plants based on their light and their aesthetic. And people started calling it a speakeasy. But from there, my partner that I started dating during this process, we started doing larger design projects, and those projects started to move outdoors into the garden for our clients. And I found a lot of parallels working as a painter and as a garden designer. As a painter, I always enjoyed working with my hands, but it always felt like something was missing. And working with plants, I really felt like I had found my medium, and I find it to be very creatively fulfilling.
You know, I've got this amazing book, and I can't for the life of me think what it's called, but it is about recreating favourite artworks through the medium of plants. And it's more about outdoor design, but it is so interesting how you can be so inspired by art and then translate that through and make it kind of happen through the medium of plants. They're so versatile and they allow you such great creativity. And you've got a new book out which is called Moon Garden. And I just love this concept. It's such a great thing to me. Anything that's a bit mystical and magical and kind of otherworldly really, really speaks to me, particularly with plants. So how did you get interested in moon gardens? How did the idea even strike you?
Well, I became interested in them, I would say, first from going on really long walks at night with my partner, Adam, and our dog, Topanga. We would go on these walks and observe our neighbors' gardens. And it became a bit of a nightly ritual, admiring gardens and smelling the flowers. Especially while we were building our business, we were working 7 days a week and also at night. And so these walks really helped us step away from our work and our screens and really take some time to decompress and relax. And we became really mesmerized by gardens at night and how peaceful they are, and also how much activity there actually can be in the garden at night. So when the publisher actually reached out to me with this idea, I was really excited to dive into this world of night blooming plants and exploring more of what it means to be in a night garden and what it means to design a garden that is meant to be enjoyed in the evening.
A lot of people automatically think, moonlight, maybe a lack of artificial lighting. And so I think sometimes the idea is that, people think, well, do they have to contain all white flowers? Would you say that's the case?
Absolutely not. But the ideal palette for a moon garden is a spectrum of whites and silvers, along with pale colors like pale purples and pinks and also yellows. And the reason is because these colors reflect the most light at night. Vita Sackwell West actually created a moon garden at Sissinghurst Castle in the 1940s, I believe, 50s. I'll have to double check that. But she writes about how she really enjoyed playing with this limited color palette and the challenges that came with this restraint of only allowing herself to use whites and silvers primarily. And she created a beautiful garden that people visit to this day.
They definitely do. And in fact, I live quite near to Sissinghurst, so I do go and check it out, regularly.
And that's amazing.
Yeah, I know. I am incredibly lucky. I do live in an amazing part of the world in terms of horticulture. But quite often the white garden at Sissinghurst contains different shades of white, which in the daylight can actually sometimes be quite, it's not wrong, but it's just, you have a lot of different tones going on. So do you think moon gardens need to work during the day as well as at night, or are they okay to just do the kind of heavy lifting during the evening hours?
Well, I think it really depends on how much space you have. So if you don't have, an estate like at Sissinghurst, then you might end up incorporating moon garden elements into your existing garden. So you can have vibrant colors that you enjoy during the day, and then those will all fade away at night anyway. And that's where you can have your white flowers and silver foliage take the spotlight under the moonlight. If you do have enough space to be able to experiment with different kinds of gardens and you have a designated area for your moon garden, then I would say it's really lovely to really commit to this color palette and see what you can do with it at night and, the kind of enchanted atmosphere you can create using these specific colors.
In terms of maximising space, I'm assuming if you had a smaller garden, then do you want your moon garden to be visible from the house, for example? Is it the sort of thing you want to be able to see through your windows? Because you may not always want to go outside, depending on the weather, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say that it would be really lovely to have a view of your moon garden from the comforts of your home, especially with the sweet fragrances that come with it. Wafting through your windows, that would just be lovely. And one consideration, depending on where you live, is a lot of night blooming plants are tropical. So if you live in a colder climate, you would want to grow these varieties either as annuals or in containers that you can bring indoors in the winter time.
Very good point. And that is another question actually that I had for you, which is, should you be planting for year-round interest, or do you think that the moon garden is more relevant during the summer months?
I think you should definitely plant for year-round interest. Where I am in the northeastern part of the United States, we have some native evergreens that are great for a moon garden, like Magnolia grandiflora and American holly. Not only do these evergreens provide a backdrop year round for your flowering perennials and shrubs, but they're well suited to a moon garden because of their glossy leaves and texture. And in the case of the magnolia, they're beautiful night fragrant white flowers as well. And I think that just to be able to take a stroll in your garden any season is worthwhile, and there are a lot of plants that you can still celebrate in the winter time.
In the UK, for example, we might not have the moon out clearly for, many times during the year. So is it really important that the moon garden is based around the moon, or are there other ways of illuminating it so that you get to enjoy it?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, in an ideal world, your moon garden has views of the full moon rising and clear views of the stars, but you don't need the full moon or a view of it to enjoy your garden at night. It's really about creating an environment that invites tranquility with soft lighting, water features, sound, and plants. Um, so I would say that many tropical night blooming plants are in full bloom in the summer. So summer is a wonderful time to enjoy the garden at night, especially when it's too hot to spend much time in it during the day. But there are many fragrant shrubs with wonderful aromas at night in bloom in the spring and the fall as well.
Have you got any kind of particular favourites in terms of night blooming and night fragrant plants? I think it's sometimes a consideration that we overlook as gardeners because we tend to be gardening during the daylight hours. But I think there's quite a big palette, isn't there, of plants that fit that category?
There really is. One favorite of mine is evening primrose because it's actually native to the Northeastern part of the United States. And I also really enjoy gaura, also known as whirling butterflies. That's a beautiful night fragrant wildflower. I love Brugsmansia. Well, angel's trumpets. Those are so beautiful. And I love all the different shades that they come in, but they are poisonous. So they're not the best plant if you have kids or pets. I really love magnolias. I learned while doing research for this book that magnolias are especially night fragrant. And I love Magnolia grandiflora for their beautiful white flowers. I also love oak leaf hydrangeas. I think that they're just such a versatile plant to use in any garden, and they have a really subtle but sweet fragrance. And I love the foliage of them as well, and they offer fall foliage and fall interest in addition to their flowers all summer long.
And you mentioned as well about the activity in a night garden. And I was wondering, can they benefit wildlife too?
Yes, that's one thing that's very important to me in my gardening practice. And so I made sure to write a lot about native plants that will work really well in a moon garden. But the really cool thing about night blooming plants is that they attract moths and bats with their sweet and spicy scents. And moths are a very important food source in the food chain. But I also write about climbing vines and trees and different kinds of native plants that you can feature in your moon garden.
You mentioned water and other things that you could put into your moon garden. I'm guessing you could even put speakers out there to kind of have music. Are there any things that you think are really good to include in your moon garden to almost kind of tempt you outdoors during the evening?
Well, we've spoken about fragrance. Fragrance is one of the key elements to a moon garden. As your vision fades at night, it's as if your sense of smell grows stronger. So you want to choose plants with fragrances that you love. Historically, water features have also been a key element in moon gardens because they're very reflective and they invite contemplation. And in medieval Japan, in dry gardens, expanses of sand were used in place of water. I would encourage you to bring in a water element to help offer like that sense of serenity that also the sound of water can bring with either a trickling fountain or perhaps you live by a stream. How lovely is that for a moon garden? And you also, again, with the wildlife, you want to try to attract as much wildlife as you can, whether it be fireflies or beautiful moths or bats.
Often we consider our use of the garden during the daytime, and that might include, say, outdoor furniture. Do you think there's a benefit to including furniture or a seating area that you would actually use specifically at night as well?
Definitely. I think that you want to think about how you want to enjoy your garden in the evening and choose your furniture accordingly. So if you want to host dinner parties or full moon parties, then it makes sense to have a full dining table set. But if you want to use your garden to chill and look up at the stars, then it would make sense to have some Adirondack chairs. Or if it's a space for you to meditate, then you might want to throw some pillows on the ground, depending on how you see yourself using your garden on a nightly basis.
And what I like about the book is that you give examples of how people can engage with their garden in the evening. Can you talk about some of the activities again that people can do to help them enjoy their moon gardens?
Well, one of the fun ones is you can throw a full moon party. You can invite all of your friends to arrive at a time just before the moon might be rising and ask your guests to wear white or silver or something shimmery as part of the festivities. I would say keep the lighting soft and minimal and keep the music low so that people can really enjoy the sounds of the night as well. But you can design some really lavish floral arrangements if you'd like, and really use the moon as a theme to bring people together and to connect everybody with nature. I also write about gathering your friends to celebrate the opening of the night blooming cactus. And that's a special event that people have been gathering for centuries to celebrate. And you can do this over drinks or however you enjoy getting together with your friends. The book has meditations and rituals that invite you to think about the spiritual power of the moon and to connect you with nature. It has journal prompts where the phase of the moon is an opportunity to think about different phases and patterns in your own life. And that can be a really great thing to do on a nightly basis, just journaling in your garden.
A lot of books talk about design and planting, but they don't talk about how you can actually use the space. And I like the fact that you explore that. And also, another surprising thing, people can't see this because it's a podcast, but you have some amazing houseplants. And you talk about creating a moon garden indoors. How did you realise that?
Well, many night blooming plants make great houseplants year round. And some of them you'd be surprised are actually night fragrant, like bromeliads and Hoyas. Night blooming cacti like Queen of the Night and rickrack cacti are also night blooming one night a year, typically. So that's quite a big deal. But also snake plants are actually night blooming. It depends on the type of plant, but I would say that orchids and anthuriums make really great houseplants for a moon garden because they have such long-lasting flowers. And there are a lot of plants with silver or variegated foliage that you can use to add some shimmer indoors, especially if you don't have as much sunlight in your home for flowering plants indoors. You can also bring in fragrant pink jasmine in the winter for some more fragrance and forest bulbs like paperwhites or amaryllis for the holidays.
I love the idea that you might be able to have a window that was framed by plants where the moon kind of hit at a certain time. It's a really lovely way of framing the moon and making it a part of your life, I suppose, and making it something that's celebrated. So obviously you spoke about Sissinghurst and you have your own examples of gardens that you've designed. Are there any other examples of moon gardens, either indoors or outdoors, that you think people could go and either visit or look up online?
Yes, absolutely. One of the gardens is in Kyoto, and it's at the Silver Pavilion, which was a retirement villa for the shogun in the 15th century. They have a beautiful moon garden there. And there is the Matabag Garden, which is directly translated to be the Moonlight Garden, and that one is situated directly across from the Taj Mahal. I think that the Moon Garden at Sissinghurst is definitely worth visiting. I'm really excited to visit it sometime soon. But I wouldn't say that there are that many public gardens that are moon gardens. And that's one of the things that is a bit unfortunate right now is I feel like a lot of public spaces aren't open in the evenings to enjoy. So whenever you do get to, go to a botanical garden for an event at night, it feels extra special.
That's a really good point, actually. You don't get to experience these gardens in the evening, and I think maybe that's why they're a little bit underrated. Unless you get a private tour or it's a private garden that you get invited to, you don't really get the chance to access it during the evening. And I think this is such a good thing to explore in people's own gardens. If you could kind of give people one thing that they could do, perhaps when they're thinking about creating their own garden or designing it, what would be your best tip to get people underway?
That's a good question. I would say really assess your light to see what kind of plants you can bring in for your moon garden and think about what kind of fragrance that you love. There are so many different fragrant night blooming plants. Some are very powerful, maybe even too strong for some more sensitive noses. So consider night blooming varieties with fragrances that you really love, but also depending on what size space you have, potentially choose plants that are fragrant both day and night. So you don't have to choose. You get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good tip. And particularly, about seeing where the light falls. I'm guessing that just comes down to being outside in your garden in the evening and just experiencing it.
Yeah, definitely observe where in your garden you might have a view of the moon or clear skies. You don't want to plant your moon garden plants underneath, let's say, the canopy of a very dense tree, because then they won't be able to reflect the moonlight in that same way. So hopefully there's a space where you can enjoy the view of the sky from your garden. But if not, you can also use many of the elements I write about in the book to create your own peaceful atmosphere at night, regardless.
Thank you very much to Jarema for taking part in the interview, and thank you to you as well for listening. The book Moon Garden is available to order now in the UK, and of course there's a link to it in the show notes. This week's shout out to good people doing good things is to the Roots and All Patreon and GoFundMe supporters who helped me pay for the podcast to be edited and to keep the website up and running, which is good as I've just had to pay for the hosting again and it's gone up quite a bit. I've said it before, but in order to keep the podcast ad-free and independent, it actually costs me money to put the podcast out. So the Patreon supporters and the GoFundMe supporters are doing a great thing that benefits all listeners. So please join me in thanking all those kind people who have and do support the podcast financially. Now, I think we may have actually weathered the worst of this particular storm, but here's Dr. Ian Bedford with some information about why your house can seem like it's being invaded during the autumn.
Each year, the arrival of autumn heralds a few anxious weeks for the arachnophobes amongst us, since this is the time of year we call the spider season, the period when many of Britain's 650 spider species have become fully grown and are now far more obvious to us. Whether it's a garden orb spider in the centre of a big sticky web that it had spun overnight across a garden path, or a spindly-legged cellar spider in the corner of the garage who bobs up and down when the light is switched on, or perhaps a glossy-bodied false widow clinging to a log that's taken from the woodpile. But probably the spiders that cause most concern to arachnophobes are the large hairy ones that during autumn seem to be out to invade our homes. The house spiders, with their impressive leg span of around 3 inches and a running speed of around 1 mile an hour. But assuming that they'll have entered from the outside world, through an overflow pipe, gaps in floorboards, or perhaps an open window or door will unfortunately be wrong, since the house spiders, as their name suggests, will almost certainly have spent all of their life inside our home, hidden away within a tangle of webbing, where they'll have remained relatively inactive for sometimes up to 2 years, feeding on a wide variety of bugs that inadvertently venture within reach of their fangs. So why during autumn would they leave the safety of their webs to scuttle around our homes? Well, it's not all the resident house spiders that are doing so, but just the mature males ready to mate, and so they go out searching for a female. A receptive, mature female that'll be waiting somewhere within the house, perhaps under a sideboard or at the back of a kitchen cupboard. Tracking down the female spiders by following their chemical scent, the males cautiously mate with them. Then, if they avoid becoming her next meal, they'll wander off to die. Which brings the annual spider season to a close. Meanwhile, though, the mated females remain dormant amongst their messy blankets of webbing until the following spring, when they awaken to perform their final task, spinning silken sacks that they fill with eggs and suspend within their web before their lives all come to an end. Then around 6 weeks later, a small hole appears in the egg sacs, out of which emerge around 50 tiny spiderlings. Minute, inconspicuous spiderlings that disperse around our homes to places where they can each spin a messy web, catch unwary bugs to eat, and for the few that survive the following 2 years, develop into large, hairy house spiders.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.